Recently listened to this book. It's 11/22/63. It's by Stephen King, and it's his time travel Let's Save JFK story. I have some thoughts about three of them, and so I wanted to share them with you here. Thought number one. This is an incredibly good book. It's one that is absolutely worth reading. It has very well fleshed out, well developed, very likable characters. It's got a set of main characters that are all well done, but it's also got a set of minor characters, even bit players, and all of them feel like absolutely real people. They're not the bit players aren't just there to serve the plot or to move things along. Even though that's why they're there, they still feel like real people, and you get a very real sense of who they are outside of what's happening on the page. This is also a place that has very relatable, very engaging settings. And the stories, most of the story takes place in both small town Maine and small town Texas. The setting that we spend most of our time in Maine is actually a place called Derry, and it's a place that if you're a fan of King's, you're already familiar with it. It's the main setting for it, at least the first part of it. Takes place in Derry, and so it's a setting that's very familiar for King. And even though he probably uses a lot of shorthand to describe it here, you can tell he's very familiar with it. And it's something that's already in his head, and it doesn't take much for him to really be able to paint that as a real place. When the book moves to Texas, as you expect it to with a JFK assassination story, most of the action takes place in a town called Jody, and that also. And I live in the Dallas area. I live in the area he set this part of the book in, and I don't think it's a real place. It could be that I just am not aware of it, or could have been, and I'm just unaware of it. But yeah, it's a place called Jody, and again, small town, but feels incredibly real. You get a real sense of the people and the place and the culture and the community that's there. And so that makes the book just incredibly engaging and very, very fun to read. This book is long though. And it's set 5 years, or the main action that takes place 5 years before the assassination, and for reasons that it has to. It's not just pick that number out of the thin air and we've decided to move it back to here. It's important that it starts where it starts, but we do spend a lot of time. That's a lot of time to get us to the point where the main action of the book is going to start, and so it feels at times like we are covering every single day there. Now, granted, that amount of time is also what makes these characters feel very real. We live with them for a long time. We live in these places for a long time. But it did feel like maybe there were some places where this could have been sped up, some things that could have been condensed or tightened, and we didn't need to see like essentially every day between 1955, actually 1958 and 1963, depicted. But that's kind of a quibble. Just know that if you're want to read this or listen to it, you're in for a bit of a it's long. It's 30 plus hours audiobook. I don't know what that equates to in number of pages, but it's a lot. The third thing, and this is probably something that's very specific to me, but I wanted to mention it. There were a couple points where this story, the details that took me out of this story. One of the reasons I wanted to listen to it is because I mentioned that I live in the Dallas area. I spent most of my life here, so it takes place in the setting, the Dallas setting itself is very familiar to me. Part of my career was when I first started working out of college was in newspapers, and I worked for a time at the Dallas Morning News, and our offices were in downtown Dallas. And I would drive home every night over the point where, down the same street, the school book depository was on my right, and I would drive over the point where Kennedy was assassinated. So this is all stuff that is very much in my head, and I wanted to see what he did with it. But having lived in Texas, there's a point where the main character comes into the state and he passes a "Don't mess with Texas" sign. And "Don't mess with Texas" was a big thing, a big saying around here because it was part of a campaign, a "Don't Litter" campaign launched in the mid '80s by the state government. And so having the main character see that back in the late '50s, early '60s, having seen a "Don't mess with Texas" sign, knowing that it didn't come around for 20 more years, really kind of took me out of the book for a moment. And that's like I said, a factual detail that may be very specific to me and people in this area, but I did catch it, and it was like a little jarring. It's like that wouldn't have been there. The other thing that took me out of the story, and then this is real specific to me, although and it goes back to my journalism days. There's a point where he sees the main character sees a newspaper headline in big 36-point type. It says this. Well, 36-point type is only a half inch. 36 point type is the kind of headline type you'd put a lower on the page in a minor story. It wouldn't be the splashy 72 point, 84 point type, which is going to be 1 inch, which is going to be 1.5 inches. It's going to be much bigger type and have that feeling of wow, screaming splashy headline that 36 point type just isn't going to give you. So again, minor, but took me out of the story. Overall, this is definitely something worth reading. If you're a fan of King, you've probably already read it. If you're not a fan of King and want to get into him, it's probably a good way to get into him because it's not a scary book. It's a time travel book. It's still speculative fiction, but it's very engaging, very, very much worth your time, and you will have to invest some time into it. No getting around that, but definitely an investment worth making.